Good morning, all. This is Jason Koontz of the Christian Apologetics, boldly proclaiming Jesus. Today, I just want to talk to you a little bit about Joseph in the Bible. Joseph's found in the latter part of Genesis. He actually contains the most chapters about his life and, more importantly, about his story. And what I want to focus on about his story is how he didn't let his circumstances or his past circumstances change who he was and change who he worshiped and change who he put his trust in. You see, Joseph started out as a very favored life, and he kind of knew it. And he had dreams about how his brothers and his family would end up bowing down to him. His father obviously favored him. He gave him a coat of many colors. And this caused tension between his brothers and him, and we're not sure how much Joseph played that up or anything like that, because it's not really his fault that his father favored him. But, as kids do, maybe he, pranced it around or, say, hey, look at me, I got this coat, and things like that. Because we got to understand that coats with, dyes of different colors were very valuable back then. They weren't easy to come by. We can't just go to the store and buy whatever color they wanted. They have to make them and all those things. So the first bad thing that happened to Joseph was that his brothers conspired to kill him. They were going to just, end his life and leave it at that and tell his dad that a lion got him. But one of the brothers said, no, that's probably not the best idea. So they got him out of the pit that they put him in, and they sold him into slavery. And then they dipped his coat in the blood and told his father that a lion had killed him. And of course, his father, thinking he was dead, grieved and was sad. But Joseph wasn't dead. He was on his way to Egypt, and he spent some time in prison there, quite a bit of time. And there was even times where it seemed like he was coming out of it, because he became high up in Potiphar's house and was doing well, until Potiphar's wife took a liking to him in the wrong way. And Joseph ran and did the right thing, but he left his piece of his clothing. So she said that he came on to her, and then he was tossed back into prison. And that's where he met the Pharaoh's butler and the cook, and he had the dreams about, which one would survive and which one would be killed. And he ended up being right. And it took some time, but this person remembered that and told Pharaoh, when Pharaoh had dreams, that there was this person that interpreted his dream correctly, and they sent for Joseph, and Joseph ended up interpreting Pharaoh's dreams about a famine coming and how they'd have 7 years of plenty and then 7 years of famine, and they were to store up food in the first 7 years so they'd have it for the next 7 years. And they ended up storing up a ton of food, enough to feed all the surrounding countries and nations and peoples. And they'd come to Egypt, and Egypt became a hub of the only place with food. And Joseph's family, Jacob, his father, and his brothers, of course he sent his brothers first, ended up coming. And in the meantime, Pharaoh had placed Joseph over that operation. So Joseph was high up in the Egyptian government, and his brothers didn't recognize him because he probably was older and he had on all the Egyptian garb and that royalty would, because you picture all those things from movies and things like that. So they didn't recognize him, and Joseph kind of played a ploy a little bit and said that they got caught for stealing food, and Benjamin ended up being kept, which was the youngest. And so they had to go back to Jacob, and Jacob was grieved, and they sent him back, the brothers back. And in the end, because it goes back and forth a little bit in the Bible, but Joseph ended up showing his brothers who he was. And he didn't seek retribution. He didn't seek, of course, he played that game on them a bit, but he ended up forgiving them. And Jacob and all of them ended up coming and living in Egypt. And that's how the Israelite people found themselves in Egypt, so many years later when Moses came along to free them. When they had, the Bible tells us that the Egyptians forgot who Joseph was. Most think that there was a change of rulership because Egypt went through different periods, Old Kingdom, New Kingdom. There was even foreign people that ruled Egypt for a while. So most people think it was during this time, one of those times. But the point of this story I want to get to is about Joseph's past and his circumstances. I know a lot of our pasts are not pretty. They may be quite hard to talk about. They may be full of places where you find yourself in the pit, and maybe not a literal pit, but you find yourself, at the whims of the people who were supposed to love you, who were supposed to care for you, who were supposed to be trusted for your care and to nurture you, and they did the opposite. I want to use the story of Joseph to show that you don't have to keep that cycle going. I've had a past. I've lived through things that are very traumatic. I've grew up with an abusive stepfather. I didn't know my father until very recently, and that's been a great blessing. But that left its mark on me growing up, thinking I wasn't good enough, or thinking, all these things that I was even told that I was, less than because I had some disabilities to overcome. And I have quite, through God's help, I have overcome these, and most people looking at me today would never know. And I thank God for that. Like I said, I had an abusive stepfather who was very abusive, both physically and mentally, and left my brother and I with a lot of scars. And there's just, on to adulthood, it's been pretty good, but I did end up losing my son. We still have challenges raising two of our boys with autism. So the point is of me telling you all this, and I'm not going to get into details because, quite frankly, I don't live in the details anymore. I live in the redemption that Jesus brought to me, that Jesus gave to me. I do think back on these things sometimes, and I think it's important to, but I don't think you can stay there. I don't think you can dwell there. I don't think you can stay in that pit. If Joseph had just looked at his circumstances about his brothers throwing him in the pit and allowed that to make him bitter, or if he looked at his circumstances where he was in prison for years and living in bad conditions and things like that, he wouldn't be able to see the blessing of his life after that, right? In life, sometimes the bad things that happen to you, God will use to promote your journey to a destination of prominence. God used Joseph being sold into slavery, being in that prison, to promote him to a place of prominence. And a lot of that was because of Joseph's mindset. He never gave up worshiping God, and he never gave up God in those circumstances. And in our lives, that's what we need to do. I'm not saying those places aren't hard. Those places aren't something that can easily overtake you, can easily change you, can easily mold you. But it is a choice at the end of the day, no matter how hard that choice is. We need to make a choice to follow God and to give it to Him, to surrender it to Him, all of it, not just, our inadequacies, our weaknesses, but we need to surrender the bad things that happen. And that's what we do when we forgive. That's what we do when we move on, you know, because I don't live in my past anymore. Yes, in some ways, my past has made me realize that there is a hurting world out there, that there is a world of evil that sometimes is just beyond the house walls. It's not, you don't have to go far to find evil in this world. You know, if you saw us as children and our stepfather, maybe no one really realized the horrors that went on within our house as a child. But it wasn't far from them. They didn't have to look far to know it. And we don't have to look far. But I also know that there's goodness in this world, that there's people that cared enough for me to take me under their wing and help me and restore me. And they may not have even known my story fully. Because quite frankly, I don't talk about it a ton, and I never have, and I just don't feel it's a place where I need to stay. I don't need to stay there. I'm not in that place anymore. But at the same time, it is good to look back and see what God has brought you out of, what God has done in your life. Because if I didn't make that choice to follow God and to surrender it to God, I would be a very different person today. I'd be wallowing in pity. I'd be, um, in some cases, people, make the choices to be what their upbringing. Let that trauma overtake them and they become perpetrators themselves. That was something that when I was growing up, I was very fearful for, is that I thought somehow people would think I'm a monster. And that stopped me in a lot of ways from sharing what I went through. And again, I've told this story before, but I was honest when we were going through marriage counseling before we got married, because that's what you do when you get married in the church. A pastor will kind of go through. And I was telling him some of, not even everything that happened in my childhood, and they took it to think that I was going to be an abuser of my wife myself. And that's, if you know me, that's something I'd never do. And they didn't really know me. I was at a point in my life where I was running from the church I grew up in, and I didn't get married in my church. Then it was another pastor. And I'm sure they had the best of intentions. They were trying to protect my wife and maybe even trying to help me. I don't know. But to be honest with you, that really hurt, and that really kind of reinforced the thoughts in my mind that people would think I'm a monster if I share my story, right? That people would think I was somehow less than, or, some egregious thing. But now I'm not afraid to share my story because I don't live there. I'm not that person. I made the choice to give it to God. I made the choice to forgive. And one avenue of that forgiveness has given me so many blessings to this day. I have forgiven and I get the opportunity to know my father. And my stepfather has since passed, and I pray that he sought forgiveness and sought to know Jesus before he passed. I really do pray for that because I don't want to even see him in hell. He should have a chance at redemption, and I hope he did. But the point is that sometimes, all the time, we need to give these things to God. We have a choice in every situation, no matter if that choice is very hard. Sometimes our choices are not easy, but that doesn't mean we can't make the right one. To give it to God, to give it to Him. And even it's not even really us surrendering our own sin. It was something that happened to us. But if we're not careful, we can keep the cycle going. And I may not have done the same things that was done to me, but if I hadn't given to Him, the anger and the bitterness would have bled over onto my family now in some way, even if it wasn't in the same way I experienced. We need to take care of the wounds that we have, or we'll bleed on the people we love, okay? And that's something that Joseph is a big example of. He had forgiven his brothers, and he even was able to live with, have them come to Egypt, and he didn't have any ill will towards them. And it helped that his brothers were repentant and asked for forgiveness. And I think that's an important part, is that you can forgive somebody, but that doesn't mean you have to um, be restored to them, especially if they don't ask for forgiveness themselves. Okay, you don't have to be an enabler and allow that same actions to continue over and over. That's not what I'm saying. It takes the other person being repentant as well. And, that's up to you if you have that relationship restored or not. But I can tell you that there is so much freedom and forgiveness for yourself. It's not just for the other person, it's for you. It's for your family now. When you surrender it all to God, there's so much freedom in that. And today, I'm not going to sit here and say I understand the traumas you've been through. I understand the abuse. I understand the evil things that people committed against you, because I don't. I know my own story. I know my own past. I know my own scars. And I know even though I've given it to God, it still leaves its marks on me today. Sometimes I'm down just for no reason, and I don't know why. And I think it's just because of what happened. And those are things I still work through. Forgiveness and healing is something that takes a lifetime, really. Sometimes you have to understand that it's not linear. Sometimes it's circular. Sometimes you go up a hill and down a valley and up a hill. It doesn't mean that you're not making progress. You got to keep going forward, keep stepping, keep trying, keep praying, keep giving it to God, keep surrendering, because that's what's most important. So today I just wanted to talk a little bit, because sometimes I often wonder how I was able to get to this point. And I keep going back to, I gave it to God. I have given that to God. And he tells us he'll take those things off our shoulders and help us carry them. I still have those experiences. I think those experiences in a good way now make me understand that sometimes people are carrying things we don't even know. And we need to have an understanding and a knowledge that people's pasts do craft them. But they don't have to stay in those pasts. They don't have to live in those pasts. I'm living proof that you can give it to God, and he will help you and mold you and even use those past experiences when you're ready to help others. So today, let us take the example of Joseph, and let us not be crushed by our past, but begin to lift it with Jesus' help. So that's my message for today. And I'm just going to pray for you. Dear Heavenly Father, I don't know who's watching this video. I don't know their past. I don't know the traumas that they've been through, the abuses they've suffered, the past that wants to destroy them and wants to keep them locked in its prison and its grasp. I don't know that past, but you do. I know that you can help them carry that, and I know you can help them make that choice to give it to you and to surrender it to you, to say that I know that you will help me through, Father. I know you will help me through this path that seems so hard to climb, but you will help me. I just ask that they give it to you and be like Joseph, who didn't let his past destroy him, but he let his past mold him into what you wanted him to be. I just ask that you do that for whoever is watching this video. I just ask that you help them make the choice and help them have a pathway out, and to keep them safe if these abuses are still happening. I just ask these things in your precious name. Amen. So I appreciate you watching this video. I hope you like, share, and subscribe, or if you know someone that could hear this story. I don't claim to be anything better than you. I just claim to know that give it to the one who can help us carry it. So I hope you have a good day, and God bless.